the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Authentic Audio Productions. Elevate your podcast. Take everything to the next level with custom content creation, show hosting, and professional services and tools across the board. Visit AuthenticAudioPro.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. Monday, November 25th. Happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. Probably just one show this week unless something crazy happens, and that crazy could come in the form of Daniel Jones because the Giants did officially waive him Saturday. He can clear waivers, will clear waivers at 4 p.m. Eastern today, and then will be free to sign for most likely a minimum $375,000, which is what's remaining for the next 6 weeks. But, you know, and I'm sure it's just hearsay and agents doing his work and things like that, but there appears to be 4 to 5 teams involved here, and I understand it. This guy's not a total disaster. He does have athleticism. There is a pedigree there, and there's a lot to be said about the fact that he was thrown into a situation that most were not going to succeed in. Now, this was a better situation, I think, than some of the other highly drafted players that have fizzled out with their drafted teams. And certainly the money hurts, right? The $82 million guaranteed, of which he will make 35 and change this year just to walk away. But I do think there's something there. And by the way, that something is more than some of these teams have either as their starting quarterback right now, or certainly as their QB2 heading towards the postseason and maybe even a deep postseason run. I've scoured the internets and used logic to come up with the list of potential teams. There's an immediate connection with Buffalo, at least being reported as such. And I'm just not there. I'm just not there on that one. Trubisky seems like a fine option, even though he is not plug and play Josh Allen. And I get it. There was some Josh Allen comps with Daniel Jones early on in his career, but that's laughable now, okay? Because Josh Allen is way above, on top of the mountain, and Daniel Jones is sliding down on his ass right now. So I get it. There's athleticism. There's the ability to maneuver. He's maybe more run than pass right now in a lot of situations. The arm strength's not there. The ability to make the quick decisions there. And Josh Allen, obviously, as the MVP leader in the clubhouse, has now transformed his game into this take what they give you, patience, and then kill him with a couple of big hits kind of moment stuff. So obviously, any comparisons to Josh Allen with Daniel Jones goes back years before any of this stuff has grown into what it is now. And that's not to be expected. There is not a team out there looking at Daniel Jones, whether it's for the next 6 weeks or for anything in 2025 and beyond, to become that player. But we do have some pretty good examples of reclamation projects, right? We do have Baker Mayfield showing up the Giants yesterday in Tampa. We do have Geno Smith now sitting atop the NFC West with Seattle. There was a Tannehill comeback. Okay, there's a bit of a Darnold comeback. So we do have room for this. It takes a certain type of player, and it certainly takes a certain type of team. That is what the next 6 weeks is about, in my opinion. I get the immediate draw, and I bid on Twitter myself to throwing this guy into a Dallas Cowboys uniform for the next few weeks, especially with a Thanksgiving matchup. I mean, that's ridiculous to think that they're going to sign this guy tomorrow, which would be when waivers officially clears, and have this guy suit up Thursday against the Giants. It's the Hollywood story we're never going to get. Let's put it that way. Do the Cowboys make sense? Well, the 4-7 Cowboys could very easily become the 5-7 Cowboys after Thanksgiving because it's the Giants. And Washington's stumbling. There's a mess of stumbling NFC teams in the middle of that pack. There's a world where they are not out right now, internally speaking. And if that's the case, then this isn't a Thanksgiving conversation. This is a 6-week conversation for Dallas. And I do believe that Daniel Jones represents an upgrade to the Cooper Rush Trey Lance situations. So that alone makes that a contender. Not so much about what can happen over the next 72 hours, but if this guy's an upgrade and Dallas has a chance to sneak in the back end of this thing in a really weird NFC, this is a move you're supposed to make. Let's just put it that way. Other teams, San Francisco. I don't think anybody really knows what's going on with Brock Purdy. And that's not a good sign in week 12, week 13. Now, if they believe he can come back and be Brock Purdy in week 13, fine. But my guess is, just reading some tea leaves, that they're at least going back and forth with this situation. And as of today, there's no way they can run Brandon Allen back out there. I mean, the decision making, he buckled under pressure. He just wasn't the guy. And, I think you've already lost that locker room after an hour and a half of that relationship being exposed out there. So it's probably not a situation that's tenable. If Brock Purdy's the guy, you still need something behind him. So San Francisco's in whether or not Brock Purdy is healthy in week 13, regardless. And it begs the question, could this be a 1-2 punch then for not just this year, but maybe going forward next year as well, with Purdy's situation somewhat fluid in the upcoming offseason? I'd put the same onus on Minnesota. Darnold has looked good, at times great. He's sort of morphed back into the player that he probably could have been in a better situation with New York. But this is probably the Sam Darnold we're going to get. A little bit inconsistent, at times top tier stuff, at times, 3-4 picks, but somewhere right in the middle of the pack, which is sort of where Daniel Jones ended up as well. Right? The Giants just didn't want to have this contract on their books, and certainly not the $23 million guarantee on their books for next year. But is this a guy that could play himself into a Baker Mayfield contract? Sure. That's 3 for $133 a year. And before that, it was 1 for 7 with incentives to get to 10 and 11, which he did. So that's kind of the track we're on here. All right. Is some sort of 1-year contract, certainly to finish out this season, but then if I'm his agent, even if the spot feels perfect, right? Because the perfect long-term, or I guess short long-term outlook here is Las Vegas, who Aiden O'Connell has not been able to take the reins and hold him. He's coming back from an injury. He may be available to come off of IR next week. Gardner Minshew's out for the year now with a week 12 injury, and he was on the roster bubble as well, no matter. So this is a situation that is extremely fluid on a team that's nosediving and has been nosediving since the trade deadline. Right now, Desmond Ritter's the guy. Right? Daniel Jones has to be salivating at that opportunity. If the plan is to go become a QB1, show that you've got a semblance of logic and reasoning and instincts and decision-making still, because I think he does. And try to get yourself a situation where for the next 6 weeks, you're showcasing the ability to put yourself in a good spot for a 2025 contract. I'm not signing a 2-year contract, even if it's the Raiders. There's no way I'm advising Daniel Jones as an agent to sign a contract that takes me into 2025, unless the money's stupid, and nobody's going to do that right now. They're just not. The Raiders may offer it because they know what they're looking at in 2025. But this is a situation to me where Daniel Jones is a rental, and he'll have the opportunity then to repick and reorganize and recollect his thoughts in March for what his air quotes showcase contract will be going forward. The Raiders seem to be the most logical spot because of everything I just said. But again, he's going to have the choice here. This is going to be on him. Other areas. I think there's a case to be made for the best team in football right now to latch onto this guy, and that would be Detroit. Detroit and Jared Goff are certainly blowing through this NFC. They do have some tougher matchups coming up here down the stretch, which isn't going to impact their division, or I wouldn't think they're standing in the NFC, but we'll see. But right now it's Jared Goff and Hendon Hooker. That's what they're rolling with. And if at any point in time, certainly in the postseason, Goff it gets dinged up here, I'm not sure that's a viable candidate to come in and hold down the fort. Now, they are run heavy, right? That 1-2 punch is historic right now. So they're certainly balancing themselves out that way. But this is an area where if I'm Detroit, I'm at least throwing something out there to Daniel Jones. Now, it's not going to be attractive for him because it's not a situation where where he should ever play. But after a bunch of years of being on a bad team, maybe it'll be fun to latch on to the best team in football and clear your head and figure some things out and pick Jared Goff's brain a little bit and understand Ben Johnson's offense, which is pretty damn fun as well. It's not the worst idea in the world, and it might be the best one for Daniel Jones, outside of the fact that he probably won't play a lot of football. Who else? I put Houston in the same conversation, although that's more of a struggling team right now. But that's not a bad latch yourself on to something good, something positive, and see what you have going forward there. Outside of that, I'm not sure what makes a lot of sense for Daniel Jones. So there's 4 or 5 teams. Those are the teams that I like. Carolina's not doing this. Indianapolis isn't doing this. Tennessee's not doing this. There's no point in that becoming part of their conversation in 2024. But I see that there's at least a handful. I'd put one handful of teams out there that are going to be shaking the hot stove a little bit for this player. And I do think that the Raiders make most logical sense, all things considered, but the Lions may be the best choice, all things considered. We'll see. Should be resolved in about 24 hours. I mentioned the Minshew injury. It's just another starting quarterback going by the wayside here. It's been a pretty positive season, knock on wood for that though, right? Like we haven't had the rash of quarterback injuries that we had the past couple of seasons where it was a big talking point. Now, the wide receivers have been dinged up quite a bit. Certainly some defensive players have fallen by the wayside here, but I do think that it's been a pretty positive year for quarterbacks overall. And that's a good thing for the league. It's a good thing for the contracts. That's a good thing for the futures. There's a lot to like about that. We'll see if that's one of the storylines that heads into the postseason. If we've got the best teams in football relatively healthy, and it seems, knock on wood again, that we're headed in that direction at least through about 3/4 of the season. The latest edition of the 2025 roster bubbles is now live on SpotTrack, and it highlights running backs, and that's pretty damn relevant because anybody who watched Sunday Night Football, and I'm going to guess it's a bunch of you, had a pretty good evening with Saquon Barkley, who is tearing up this league. I'm not going to sit here and spend time on what the Giants didn't do because, quite frankly, I'm not sure there was an offer from the Giants that would have kept Saquon Barkley there. Okay. The writing was on the wall that there was greener grass out there, that there was more winning out there, better offensive lines out there. He had offers from very good organizations. I would say the Giants were probably in last place most of this time. There was a significant offer thrown out there by New York. And why do we know this? Because the whole damn thing was on HBO. Okay. We all know the story. We all know what the numbers are. We all know what the offer was. We all know what was said internally. And we all know what Barkley and his camp went through during this process. And I mean, in terms of the positivity, was a dream landing spot. All he had to do was be a better version of DeAndre Swift. And he's certainly that. And he's flourishing behind this offensive line that has been somewhat restructured themselves, right? With the retirement of Jason Kelce and some guard play moving around. It's not exactly the lock and key offensive line that it's been for years and years and years. They're working on it, and it is a work in progress. And for the last 6 or 7 weeks, they've been ripping off one of the best runs in football. And Barkley's a big part of that. And this is not just great blocking. Yes, there were obvious moments of that last night where anybody with a pulse could have run through some of these lanes and holes. But he is shifty, athletic, powerful, fast. He has everything you need right now. And he's nearing 28 years old. So this is going to be one of those examples of, we don't have to really worry about the cliff falling off until it falls off, because he is putting in the work off-season wise. He has been injured. So this has not been 4.5, 5 seasons of just pound and ground Saquon Barkley football. It's been inconsistent because of the injuries. And now we've got a full season and we're seeing what it looks like. Okay. He has already surpassed his career high in rushing yards, which happened 2 years ago, which was basically a mimic season of his rookie campaign when we were so damn pumped for this guy. The receiving yards are way off. All right. I mean, his rookie season, he went 1,300 rushing, 720 receiving. I don't think we're ever getting there, but there's a world where he gets to 2,000 scrimmage yards. Okay. He's got more incentives at 1,500 rush yards. He's got more incentives at 2,000 scrimmage yards. He's already cashed $250,000 last night by going over the 1,500 scrimmage yard mark. So the money's coming in small doses at this point in time, but let's talk about it, right? Because it's a Barkley Henry conversation, and it has been for the better part of a calendar year. All right. This time last year, those two guys were headed towards free agency. We knew there was going to be a divorce in Tennessee. He was basically making post-game speeches, a couple of weeks from today with his exit from Tennessee. He knew that A, there wasn't going to be a commensurate offer from Tennessee, and B, he was looking for greener paths himself. Both these players knew they were out kicking their coverage. They had spent their time with their individual respective teams. There wasn't enough winning involved. There wasn't enough reasons to stick around. And they both found top shelf organizations and are flourishing. They are the top two free agent contracts in terms of running backs. And they are now the top two running backs in football, period. That's what's happened. Okay. So I'm going to sit here and get in my soapbox and talk about how the devaluation process should start to be reversed. I just can't do that yet, because for every Saquon Barkley, there's 4 not Saquon Barkleys. Okay. And Derrick Henry might just be a true ageless unicorn, right? The LeBron James type that we look at it and we think everybody should be able to do this, but nobody else actually can. So even Barkley, right? I don't think Barkley, with his injury history, is going to get to 30 years old and be a top 3 running back in football. It's just not something we can hang our hat on with any athlete right now. So enjoy it, appreciate it, give Baltimore and Philadelphia their credit, because they went slightly above in terms of guarantee and some structure to get these guys in their doors. But they were winning programs. They had pedigree. They had experience. It's easy to attract players like this when you have that and when it's this position. Okay. It's harder to go and find a true WR1, as Baltimore has found, right? It's really hard to find the quarterback. But once you have a couple of those pieces in place, dropping a high-priced running back in there is starting to make more sense. So to me, that's the terminology that we can start to push towards is, should bad teams in football rely on run first, high-priced, running backs, whether it's extensions from draft picks or free agents that are being thrown to the wolves? Probably not still. I think those days are gone. It's just not how you're starting the building process. Okay, you really can't cover up a mediocre quarterback with a high-priced, talented running back. Those days appear to be gone. And I don't think we have an example of that out there right now. To some degree, I think that there'd be some pushback that McCaffrey has covered Purdy's ass for a year and a half or so. But Brock Purdy has also shown that he can go out there and win ball games himself. So to me, that's the model that has truly, maybe forever changed with the way that the game is played now. There's no bell cow running back that is going to be the absolute focal point of an offense and make that team successful at the same time. And by successful, I mean legitimate deep playoff run contender, right? We saw Henry throw Tennessee on his back and certainly make Ryan Tannehill look a lot better than he actually was playing, as we found out later. But again, that's a one-of-one scenario, a one-of-one. Okay. Even as good as Christian McCaffrey is, and definitely has been for a long time, he didn't really elevate Carolina into a winning football team. So I think those days are gone, maybe long gone. But this is the model. The model isn't, we have a high-priced quarterback, we have a bunch of wide receiver weapons, we have an expensive offensive line, so we just can't afford to go out there and bring in a notable, I'm air quoting, high-priced running back, because I don't believe by any degree that $26 million guaranteed for Saquon Barkley should be considered high price through the depths of these financials. Okay. I mean, it's insane to think that right now. I threw a tweet out last night. 26 million guaranteed would be 30th among wide receivers. 30th. It'd be barely WR1. So that's what happens here. That's how far the running back has fallen. But to that point, because it should be value even at the top of the food chain in this position, if you're one of the best teams in football, this is how you should be operating. Now, some will argue that what Detroit did, which we all threw gasoline on their fire for doing when they did it, right? Signing Montgomery to a free agent deal, a nice free agent deal, and then immediately drafting Gibbs, that 1-2 punch, it's worked out so well for them that they've extended Montgomery to continue to keep that value together. And I don't think they're going to hesitate to extend Gibbs within this same window of contention. So some would argue that, sure, you can go out and try to find a Barkley and throw him into an offense that's already ticking to take it to the next level and even balance things out even more. But I do believe teams will start to smarten up and not allow those players to hit the open market if possible. So the Lions model might be the right one. Go get a free agent, even if he's a B or a C plus free agent, pay him good coin to be the player that he was supposed to be in said team, and then draft and complement and go from there. But I don't think teams are looking at this position as a penniless position anymore. I just don't. Okay, we've seen some nice extensions for Justice Hill and Montgomery, and Ramondre Stevenson got a nice one in New England, which looks like that'll round itself into form as they aggressively rebuild that roster in March. We're seeing some nice things. Chuba Hubbard, certainly, I think he's fourth right now in the league, is a reason to move on from Miles Sanders and go from there. And that brings us back to the bubble situation, where Miles Sanders is sort of the top running back in terms of financials on the top of my bubble list. It's not a sexy list by any regard because of what I'm talking about here. Mostly teams are taking care of these guys because they know that 15 million guaranteed is peanuts in the larger plan. Here's a couple of names on this list, though, in terms of who I think is probably on the chopping block. And then I do have at least one trade candidate here of note, and it's a big one. Sanders for sure is off this roster. He just hit the IR with an ankle injury. His time in Carolina is definitely done. I think Austin Eckler probably finds his way out of Washington. He's had little spurts, right? And that's sort of been the mantra with him in LA for the past couple of seasons. He's 29 going on 30. Brian Robinson is oft injured itself. This is probably one of those teams right now with Jaden Daniels in the fold that is looking for that slam dunk guy. All right. Najee Harris might hit the open market. There's a couple of names out there. But this is one of those teams that I'm talking about that probably should be thinking both free agency and the draft for this position going forward. Zach Moss, since he tried, okay, they tried to move on from an aging Joe Mixon and replace him with Zach Moss, and Mixon is balling out in Houston, and Zach Moss is already he was the RB2 by week 6. Okay, Chase Brown outplayed him immediately. I'm not even sure Chase Brown is a legitimate RB1. But Moss for sure is on the outs there, and they'll free up like $3.5 million to move on from next offseason for sure. Gus Edwards feels like Father Time is finally catching up. He's not that touchdown guy in this offense, which is really where his value was from Baltimore. I'm guessing J.K. Dobbins gets an extension to stick around in LA in that Jim Harbaugh offense, and probably means that they go cheaper with their RB2 option, pushing Gus Edwards out the door here in 2025. The other big name here is Breece Hall. And this is not clickbait by any regards, because we have absolutely no idea how aggressively big the Jets offseason is going to get in terms of ripping it down, or the Rodgers drama, which is already starting to rear its ugly head here now in week 12, week 13. We'll see. But if the plan is to go back into the draft and start this thing over, well, now you got to look yourself in the mirror if you're Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall and some of these players that are extension eligible after 2024, right? Just in a couple of weeks here, have kind of found themselves in reduced roles to some degree. Certainly the Adams thing didn't do what it was supposed to do. Let's put it that way. And he'll be for sure on the chopping block as well with his 2 years and $36 million each next. I'm just going to tag him out there as there's no doubt in my mind that front offices across the league are looking at the Jets this same way. And when that happens, you pick up the phone and you make a call to interim GM or whoever the GM is going to be in February and say, what's the deal with Brees? Is there an offer out there? Because it's not like there's not a backup plan. All right. This is a team that has been drafting running backs pretty exclusively, pretty annually, right? And Braylon Allen has shown that he can handle some stuff. And there is another youngster, the 5th round pick, Isaiah Davis from South Dakota State, under contract, rookie contract for a couple of years. Again, if you don't have the quarterback, I'm not sure that you're in a position to go big in any regard. And Breece Hall can bring back draft picks. He can bring back the ability to be more aggressive in the upcoming draft, and certainly Garrett Wilson. But I'm identifying Hall specifically because it feels like they have an 85% replacement plan for him on the roster already. So if I'm, the Washington Commanders, I'll just connect the dots there. I'm calling about Breece Hall as soon as humanly possible. And I'm just putting it out there that if at any point in time you do consider this, we're in. So I do think that's a name. And I realize that's a hot stove name to have on a bubble list right now. But everything about the Jets is hot stove-ish, unfortunately, because they have decided to gut this thing from the top down. And once they remove the quarterback from this equation, to me, all bets are off. And I realize there's some expensive defensive players in that roster, but they have offensive line struggles to fix. They have more weapons to establish themselves, and they need to find that elusive quarterback as well. So there's just too much work for me to not look at some of these players that are at least in limbo, contractually speaking, and think it's probably better to shop them than sign them right now. And that's to the other team's benefit. So that piece is now live. Again, I'm doing this as one long report. So last week we launched the quarterbacks. I've just put the running backs directly underneath them. So we'll have a nice little full out report with every position group that you can easily click to. It's mobile friendly. So if you're sitting on a subway or sitting in traffic, it should be pretty easy for you to read. If I'm missing players, because I'm not perfect, obviously, at SpotTrek on all the socials, let me know who should be there. Let me know if I'm bonkers for having a guy here in the first place. I'm trying to tread lightly with much of this. I'm not throwing every single player that has, less dead cap than a cap hit next year on this list. It's easy to do that. It's easy to get really negative with some of this stuff. I'm trying to cut this down to about 12 to 15 per position group, with logic in mind, with football in mind, and certainly with businesses in mind as well. So wide receivers probably will hit Wednesday before the holiday, and we'll discuss some of those as well. But this is the big offseason series, and again, any help you can push out to us is welcome, because you follow some of these teams way closer than I'm ever going to be able to, and I'm reading these through business goggles almost always, and some of it does make sense to me. So we'll continue down that path as much as possible. Baseball stuff slow over the weekend, as you might imagine. We did just have a signing. The starting pitcher Kikuchi from Toronto to the Angels, who appear to be the only team doing business right now. They've loaded up on a trade. Jorge Soler from the Angels. They have brought in a couple of smaller free agents, Travis d'Arnaud from the Braves to be the backup catcher, maybe the starting catcher. And now Kikuchi comes over from Toronto on a 3 for $63 at a flat $21 million per year. I don't know. I mean, they punted on Patrick Sandoval. They punted on Griffin Cannon. They had some young arms in this roster. Dan Silman does think there's a couple of arms ready to come up as well that could compete in spring training. But for the most part, they've overpaid for the 6th or 7th best starting pitcher on the open market, and that just screams Angels. And until some of these things actually work out, they're just going to be stuck in the mud, unfortunately. So I applaud them for being aggressive, being early aggressive like this. This is a very Braves thing to be doing. They just don't have that Ronald Acuna out there, and they don't have an entire infield ready to go, right? And they've got 2 more seasons of this ridiculous Anthony Rendon contract hanging under their belt. So there's a lot more negative than positive, but I will always applaud aggressiveness in the offseason, even if it's a little bit misguided and it needs a lot of prayers to actually come together on the field. But it only takes one weird year And we've certainly seen weird seasons in every single sport that we follow. So why not the Angels in 2025? We'll continue to monitor this stuff as it ramps up towards the winter meetings. Plenty more reports to come on that. The arbitration signings are starting to come in. We have an arbitration tracker live on Spotrac.com that Dan Silverman keeps up with on an annual daily basis. And plenty more to come. The international window opens up in January as well. So never a dull moment with that offseason. And we'll continue on the NFL offseason for 2025 as well. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spotrac Podcast.